Hello again. Welcome back to the Whaling Hour. Because of our technical difficulties last week, we are going to pick up again at the top of Chapter 27, Knights and Squires. It's the second chapter that's titled Knights and Squires. All right, here we go. Stubb was the second mate. He was a native of Cape Cod, and hence, according to local usage, was called a Cape Cod man. A happy-go-lucky, neither craven nor valiant, taking perils as they came with an indifferent air, and, while engaged in the most imminent crisis of the chase, toiling away, calm and collected as a journeyman joiner engaged for the year. Good-humored, easy, and careless, he presided over his whaleboat as if the most deadly encounter were but a dinner, and his crew all invited guests. He was as particular about the comfortable arrangements of his part of the boat as an old stage driver is about the snugness of his box. When close to the whale, in the very deathlock of the fight, he handled his unpitying lance coolly and offhandedly, as a whistling tinker his hammer. He would hum over his old rigadig tunes while flank and flank with the most exasperated monster. Long usage had, for this Stubb, converted the jaws of death into an easy chair. What he thought of death itself, there is no telling. Whether he ever thought of it at all might be a question, but if he ever did chance to cast his mind about that way after a comfortable dinner, no doubt, like a good sailor, he took it to be a sort of call of the watch to tumble aloft and bestir themselves there about something which he would find out when he obeyed the order, and not sooner. What, perhaps, with other things, made Stubb such an easy-going, unfearing man, so cheerily trudging off with the burden of life in a world full of grave peddlers, all bowed to the ground with their packs? What helped to bring about that almost impious good humor of his? That thing must have been his pipe. For, like his nose, his short black little pipe was one of the regular features of his face. You would almost as soon have expected him to turn out of his bunk without his nose as without his pipe. He kept a whole row of pipes there, ready loaded, stuck in a rack within easy reach of his hand, and whenever he turned in, he smoked them all out in succession, lighting one from the other to the end of the chapter, then loading them again to be in readiness anew. For when Stubb dressed, instead of first putting his legs into his trousers, he put his pipe into his mouth. I say this continual smoking must have been one cause, at least, of his peculiar disposition, for everyone knows that this earthly air, whether ashore or afloat, is terribly infected with the nameless miseries of the numberless mortals who have died exhaling it, and, as in time of the cholera, some people go about with a camphorated handkerchief to their mouths. So, likewise, against all mortal tribulations, Stubb's tobacco smoke might have operated as a sort of disinfecting agent. The third mate was Flask, a native of Tisbury in Martha's Vineyard, a short, stout, ruddy young fellow, very pugnacious concerning whales, who somehow seemed to think that the great leviathans had personally and hereditarily affronted him, and therefore it was a sort of point of honor with him to destroy them whenever encountered. So utterly lost was he to all sense of reverence for the many marvels of their majestic bulk and mystic ways, and so dead to anything like an apprehension of any possible danger from encountering them, that, in his poor opinion, the wondrous whale was but a species of magnified mouse, or at least water rat, requiring only a little circumvention and some small application of time and trouble in order to kill and boil. This ignorant, unconscious fearlessness of his made him a little waggish in the matter of whales. He followed these fish for the fun of it, and 3 years' voyage round Cape Hope was only a jolly joke that lasted that length of time. As a carpenter's nails are divided into wrought nails and cut nails, so mankind may similarly be divided. Little Flask was one of the wrought ones, made to clinch tight and last long. They called him King Post on board of the Pequod, because in form he could be well likened to the short square timber known by that name in Arctic whalers, and which by means of many radiating side timbers inserted into it serves to brace the ship against the icy concusses of those battering seas. Now, these three mates, Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask, were momentous men. They it was who by universal prescription commanded 3 of the Pequod's boats as headsmen. In that grand order of battle in which Captain Ahab would presently marshal his forces to descend on the whales, these 3 headsmen were as captains of companies. Or, being armed with their long, keen whaling spears, they were as a picked trio of lancers, even as the harpooneers were flingers of javelins. And since in this famous fishery each mate or headsman, like a Gothic knight of old, is always accompanied by his boat steerer or harpooneer, who in certain conjunctures provides him with a fresh lance when the former one has been badly twisted or elbowed in the assault, and moreover, as there generally subsists between the two a close intimacy and friendliness, it is therefore but meet that in this place we set down who the Pequod's harpooneers were, and to what headsman each of them belonged. First of all was Queequeg, whom Starbuck, the chief mate, had selected for his squire, but Queequeg is already known. Next was Tashtego, an unmixed Indian from Gayhead, the most westerly promontory of Martha's Vineyard, where there still exists the last remnant of a village of red men, which has long supplied the neighboring island of Nantucket with many of her most daring harpooneers. In the fishery, they usually go by the generic name of Gayheaders. Tashtego's long, lean, sable hair, his high cheekbones and black rounding eyes, for an Indian, oriental in their largeness, but Antarctic in their glittering expression. All of this sufficiently proclaimed him an inheritor of the unvitiated blood of those proud warrior hunters who, in quest of the great New England moose, had scoured, bow in hand, the aboriginal forests of the Maine. But no longer snuffing in the trail of those wild beasts of the woodland, Tashtego now hunted in the wake of the great whales of the sea, the unerring harpoon of the sun fitly replacing the infallible arrow of the sires. To look at the tawny brown of his lithe, snaky limbs, you would almost have credited the superstition of some of the early Puritans, and half believed this wild Indian to be a son of the prince of the powers of the air. Tashtego was Stubb, the second mate's squire. Third among the harpooneers was Daggoo, a gigantic coal-black Negro savage with a lion-like tread, and Squires to behold. Suspended from his ears were 2 golden hoops, so large that the sailors called them ringbolts, and would talk of securing the topsail halyards to them. In his youth, Daggoo had voluntarily shipped on board of a whaler lying in a lonely bay on his native coast, and never having been anywhere in the world but in Africa, Nantucket, and the pagan harbors most frequented by the whalemen, and having now led for many years the bold life of the fishery in the ships of owners uncommonly heedful of what manner of men they shipped, Daggoo retained all his barbaric virtues, and, erect as a giraffe, moved about the decks in all the pomp of 6'5" in his socks. There was a corporeal humility in looking up at him, and a white man standing before him seemed a white flag come to beg of a fortress. Curious to tell, this imperial Negro, Ahasuerus Daggoo, was the squire of Little Flask, who looked like a chessman beside him. As for the residue of the Pequod's company, be it said that at the present day not 1 in 2 of the many thousand men before the mast employed in the American whale fishery are Americans born, though pretty nearly all the officers are. Herein is the same with the American whale fishery as with the American army and military and merchant navies and the engineering forces employed in the construction of the American canals and railroads. The same, I say, because in all these cases, the native American liberally provides the brains, the rest of the world as generously supplying the muscles. No small number of these whaling seamen belong to the Azores, where the outward-bound Nantucket whalers frequently touch to augment their crews from the hardy peasants of those rocky shores. In like manner, the Greenland whalers, sailing out of Hull or London, put in at the Shetland Islands to receive the full complement of their crew. Upon the passage homewards, they drop them there again. How it is, there is no telling, but islanders seem to make the best whalemen. They were nearly all islanders in the Pequod. Isolatos, too. I call such, not acknowledging the common continent of men, but each isolato living on a separate continent of his own. Yet now, federated along one keel, what a set these isolatos were, an Acarsis Klutz deputation from all the isles of the sea, and all the ends of the earth accompany old Ahab in the Pequod to lay the world's grievances before that bar from which not very many of them ever come back. black little Pip, he never did. Poor Alabama boy. On the grim Pequod's forecastle, yet ye shall ere long see him, beating his tambourine. Prelusive of the eternal time when sent for to the great quarter-deck on high, he was bid strike in with angels, and beat his tambourine in glory. Called a coward here, hailed a hero there. Chapter 28. Ahab. For several days after leaving Nantucket, nothing above hatches was seen of Captain Ahab. The mates regularly relieved each other at the watches, and for aught that could be seen to the contrary, they seemed to be the only commanders of the ship. Only they sometimes issued from the cabin with orders so sudden and peremptory that, after all, it was plain they but commanded vicariously. Yes, their supreme lord and dictator was there, though hitherto unseen by any eyes not permitted to penetrate into the now sacred retreat of the cabin. Every time I ascended to the deck from my watches below, I instantly gazed aft to mark if any strange face were visible. For my first vague disquietude touching the unknown captain, now in the seclusion of the sea, became almost a perturbation. This was strangely heightened at times by the ragged Elijah's diabolical incoherences uninvitedly recurring to me, with a subtle energy I could not have before conceived of. But poorly could I withstand them. Much as in other moods, I was almost ready to smile at the solemn whimsicalities of that outlandish prophet of the wharves. But whatever it was of apprehensiveness or uneasiness, to call it so, which I felt, yet whenever I came to look about me in the ship, it seemed against all warranty to cherish such emotions. For though the harpooneers with the great body of the crew were far more barbaric, heathenish, and motley set than any of the tame merchant ship companies which my previous experiences had made me acquainted with, still I ascribed this, and rightly ascribed it, to the fierce uniqueness of the very nature of that wild Scandinavian vocation in which I had so abandonedly embarked. But it was especially the aspect of the three chief officers of the ship, the mates, which was most forcibly calculated to allay these colorless misgivings and induce confidence and cheerfulness in every presentiment of the voyage. Three better, more likely sea officers and men, each in his own different way, could not readily be found. And they were every one of them Americans, a Nantucketer, a Vineyarder, a Cape man. Now, it being Christmas when the ship shot from out her harbor, for a space we had biting polar weather, though all the time running away from it to the southward, and by every degree and minute of latitude which we sailed, gradually leaving that merciless winter and all its intolerable weather behind us. It was one of those less lowering but still gray and gloomy enough mornings of the transition, when, with a fair wind, the ship was rushing through the water with a vindictive sort of leaping and melancholy rapidity that, as I mounted to the deck, at the call of the forenoon watch, so soon I leveled my glance towards the taffrail. Foreboding shivers ran over me. Reality outran apprehension. Captain Ahab stood upon his quarterdeck. There seemed no sign of common bodily illness about him, nor of the recovery from any. He looked like a man cut away from the stake, when the fire has overrunningly wasted all the limbs without consuming them, or taking away one particle from their compacted, aged robustness. His whole high, broad form seemed made of solid bronze, and shaped in an unalterable mold, like Cellini's cast Perseus. Threading its way out from among his gray hairs, and continuing right down one side of his tawny, scorched face and neck, till it disappeared in his clothing, you saw a slender, rod-like mark, lividly whitish. It resembled that perpendicular seam sometimes made in the straight, lofty trunk of a great tree, when the upper lightning tearingly darts down it, and without wrenching a single twig, peels and grooves out the bark from top to bottom, ere running off into the soil, leaving the tree still greenly alive, but branded. Whether that mark was born with him, or whether it was the scar left by some desperate wound, no one could certainly say. By some tacit consent throughout the voyage, little or no allusion was made to it, especially by the mates. But once Tashtego Sr., an old gay-head Indian among the crew, superstitiously asserted that not till he was fully 40 years old did Ahab become that way branded. and then it came upon him, not in the fury of any mortal fray, but in an elemental strife at sea. Yet, this wild hint seemed inferentially negatived by what a grey Manxman insinuated. An old sepulchral man, who having never before sailed out of Nantucket, had never ere this laid eye upon wild Ahab. Nevertheless, the old sea traditions, the immemorial credulities, popularly invested this old Manxman with preternatural powers of discernment, so that no white sailor seriously contradicted him when he said that if ever Captain Ahab should be tranquilly laid out, which might hardly come to pass, so he muttered, then whoever should do that last office for the dead would find a birthmark on him from crown to sole. So powerfully did the whole grim aspect of Ahab affect me, then the livid brand which streaked to it, that for the first few moments I hardly noted that not a little of this overbearing grimness was owing to the barbaric white leg upon which he partly stood. It had previously come to me that this ivory leg had been at sea fashioned from the polished bone of the sperm whale's jaw. "Aye, he was dismasted off Japan," said the old gay-head Indian once. "But like his dismasted craft, he shipped another mast without coming home for it. He has a quiver of 'em." I was struck with the singular posture he maintained. Upon each side of the Pequod's quarterdeck, and pretty close to the mizzen shrouds, there was an auger hole, bored about half an inch or so into the plank. His bone legs steadied in that hole, one arm elevated and holding by a shroud. Captain Ahab stood erect, looking straight out beyond the ship's ever-pitching prow. There was an infinity of firmest fortitude, a determinate, unsurrenderable willfulness in the fixed and fearless forward dedication of that glance. Not a word he spoke, nor did his officers say aught to him, though by all their minutest gestures and expressions they plainly showed the uneasy, if not painful consciousness of being under a troubled master eye. And not only that, but moody, stricken Ahab stood before them with a crucifixion in his face, in all the nameless, regal, overbearing dignity of some mighty woe. Ere long, from his first visit in the air, he withdrew into his cabin. But after that morning he was every day visible to the crew, either standing in his pivot hole, or seated upon an ivory stool he had, or heavily walking the deck. As the sky grew less gloomy, indeed, he began to grow a little genial. He became still less and less a recluse, as if, when the ship had sailed from home, nothing but the dead, wintry bleakness of the sea had then kept him so secluded. And by it came to pass that he was almost continually in the air. But as yet, for all that he said, or perceptibly did, on the at last sunny deck, he seemed as unnecessary there as another mast. But the Pequod was only making a passage now, not regularly cruising. Nearly all whaling preparatives needing supervision the mates were fully competent to, so that there was little or nothing out of himself to employ or excite Ahab now, and thus chase away, for that one interval, the clouds that layer upon layer were piled upon his brow, as ever all clouds choose the loftiest peaks to pile themselves upon. Nevertheless, ere long, the warm, warbling persuasiveness of the pleasant holiday weather we came to seemed gradually to charm him from his mood. For, as when the red-cheeked dancing girls, April and May, trip home to the wintry misanthropic woods, even the barest, ruggedest, most thunder-cloven old oak will at least send forth some few green sprouts to welcome such glad-hearted visitants. So Ahab did, in the end, a little respond to the playful allurings of that girlish air. More than once did he put forth the faint blossom of a look which, in any other man, would have soon flowered out in a smile. Chapter 29. Enter Ahab. To him, Stubb. Some days elapsed, and ice and icebergs all astern, the Pequod now went rolling through the bright Quito spring, which at sea almost perpetually reigns on the threshold of the eternal August of the tropic. The warmly cool, clear, ringing, perfumed, overflowing, redundant days were as crystal goblets of Persian sherbet, heaped up flaked up with rosewater snow. The starred and stately knights seemed haughty dames in jeweled velvets, nursing at home in lonely pride the memory of their absent conquering earls, the golden-helmeted sons. For sleeping man, 'twas hard to choose between such winsome days and such seducing nights, but all the witcheries of that unwaning weather did not merely lend new spells and potencies to the outward world. Inward, they turned upon the soul, especially when the still mild hours of eve came on. Then memory shot her crystals as the clear-iced most forms of noiseless twilights, and all these subtle agencies, more and more, they wrought on Ahab's texture. Old age is always wakeful, as if the longer linked with life, the less man has to do with aught that looks like death. Among sea commanders, the old graybeards will oftenest leave their berths to visit the night-cloaked deck. It was so with Ahab. Only that now, of late, he seemed so much to live in the open air that, truly speaking, his visits were more to the cabin than from the cabin to the planks. "It feels like going down into one's tomb," he would mutter to himself. "For an old captain like me, to be descending this narrow scuttle, to go to my grave-dug berth." So, almost every 24 hours when the watches of the night were set, and the band on deck sentineled in the slumbers of the band below, and when, if a rope was to be hauled upon by the forecastle, the sailors flung it not rudely down as by day, but with some cautiousness dropped it to its place, for fear of disturbing their slumbering shipmates. When this sort of steady quietude would begin to prevail, habitually, the silent steersman would watch the cabin scuttle, and ere long the old man would emerge, gripping at the iron banister to help his crippled way. Some considering touch of humanity was in him, for at times like these he usually abstained from patrolling the quarterdeck, because to his wearied mates, seeking repose within 6 inches of his ivory heel, such would have been the reverberating crack and din of that bony step. But their dreams would have been of the crunching teeth of sharks. But once the mood was on him too deep for common regardings, and as with heavy, lumber-like pace he was measuring the ship from taffrail to mainmast, Stubb, the odd second mate, came up from below, and with a certain unassured deprecating humorousness, hinted that if Ahab was pleased to walk the planks, then no one could say nay. But there might be some way of muffling the noise, hinting something indistinctly and hesitatingly about a globe of tow, and the insertion into it of the ivory heel. Ah, Stubb, thou didst not know Ahab then. "Am I a cannonball, Stubb?" said Ahab, "that thou wouldst wad me that fashion? But go thy ways. I had forgot. Below to thy nightly grave, where such as ye sleep between shrouds, to use ye to the filling one at last. Down, dog, and kennel." Starting at the unforeseen concluding exclamation of the so suddenly scornful old man, Stubb was speechless a moment, then said excitedly, "I am not used to be spoken that way, sir. I do but less than half like it, sir." "Avast!" gritted Ahab between his set teeth, and violently moving away as if to avoid some passionate temptation. "No, sir, not yet," said Stubb, emboldened. "I will not tamely be called a dog, sir." "Then be called 10 times a donkey, and a mule, and an ass, and be gone, or I'll clear the world of thee." As he said this, Ahab advanced upon him with such overbearing terrors in his aspect that Stubb involuntarily retreated. "I was never served so before, without giving a hard blow for it," muttered Stubb, as he found himself descending into the cabin scuttle. "It's very queer, Stubb. Stop, Stubb. Somehow, now, I don't well know whether to go back and strike him or... What's that? Down here on my knees and pray for him. Yes, that was the thought coming up in me, but it would be the first time I ever did pray. It's queer. Very queer, and he's queer too. Aye, take him fore and aft. He's about the queerest old man Stubb ever sailed with. How he flashed at me. His eyes like powder pans. Is he mad? Anyway, there's something on his mind. As sure as there must be something on a deck when it cracks. He ain't in his bed now, either. More than 3 hours out of the 24. And he don't sleep then. Didn't that doughboy, that steward, tell me of a morning he always finds the old man's hammock, clothes all rumpled and tumbled, and the sheets down at the foot, and the coverlid almost tied into knots, and the pillow a sort of frightful hot, as though a baked brick had been on it? A hot old man. I guess he's got what some folks ashore call a conscience. It's a kind of tick-dolly row, they say, worse nor a toothache. Well, well, I don't know what it is, but the Lord keep me from catching it. He's full of riddles. I wonder what he goes into the afterhold for every night, as Doughboy tells me he suspects. What's that for, I should like to know? Who's made appointments with him in the hold? Ain't that queer now? But there's no telling. It's the old game. Here goes for a snooze. Damn me, it's worth a fellow's while to be born into the world, if only to fall right asleep. Now that I think of it, that's about the first thing babies do. And that's a sort of queer, too. Damn me, but all things are queer, come to think of 'em. But that's against my principles. Think not is my 11th commandment, and sleep when you can is my 12th. So here goes again. But how's that? Didn't he call me a dog? Blazes, he called me 10 times a donkey, and a piled lot of jackasses on top of that. He might as well have kicked me and done with it. Maybe he did kick me, and I didn't observe it. I was so taken all aback with his brow somehow. It flashed like a beech bone. What the devil's the matter with me? I don't stand right on my legs. Coming afoul of that old man has been a sort of turned me the wrong side out. By the Lord, I must have been dreaming, though. How? But the only way is to stash it. So here goes to hammock again, and in the morning, I'll see how this plaguey juggling thinks over by daylight. Chapter 30. The Pipe. When Stubb had departed, Ahab stood for a while leaning over the bulwarks, and then, as had been usual with him of late, calling a sailor of the watch, he sent him below for his ivory stool, and also his pipe. Lighting the pipe at the binnacle lamp, and planting the stool on the weather side of the deck, he sat and smoked. In old Norse times, the thrones of the sea-loving Danish kings were fabricated, saith tradition, of the tusks of the narwhal. How could one look at Ahab, then, seated on that tripod of bones, without bethinking him of the royalty it symbolized? For a Khan of the plank, and a king of the sea, and a great lord of Leviathans was Ahab. Some moments passed, during which the thick vapor came from his mouth in quick and constant puffs, which blew back again into his face. "How now?" he soliloquized at last, withdrawing the tube. "This smoking no longer soothes. Oh, my pipe! Hard must it go with me if thy charm be gone. Here have I been unconsciously toiling, not pleasuring, aye, and ignorantly smoking to windward all the while, to windward, and with such nervous whiffs as if, like the dying whale, my final jets were the strongest and fullest of trouble. What business have I with this pipe, this thing that is meant for sereneness, to send up mild white vapors among mild white hairs, not among torn iron-gray locks like mine? I'll smoke no more." He tossed the still-lighted pipe into the sea. The fire hissed in the waves. With the same instant the ship shot by the bubble the sinking pipe made. With slouched hat, Ahab lurchingly paced the planks. Chapter 31. Queen Mab. Next morning, Stubb accosted Flask. "Such a queer dream, King Post, I never had. You know the old man's ivory leg. Well, I dreamed he kicked me with it, and when I tried to kick back, upon my soul, my little man, I kicked my leg right off, and then, presto, Ahab seemed a pyramid, and I, like a blazing fool, kept kicking at it. But what was still more curious, Flask, you know how curious all dreams are. Although, through all this rage that I was in, I somehow seemed to be thinking to myself that, after all, it was not much of an insult, that kick from Ahab. Why, thinks I, what's the row? It's not a real leg, only a false leg. And there's a mighty difference between a living thump and a dead thump. That's what makes a blow from the hand, Flask, 50 times more savage to bear than a blow from a cane. The living member. That makes the living insult, my little man. And thinks I to myself, all the while, mind, while I was stubbing my silly toes against that cursed pyramid. So confoundedly contradictory was it all. All the while, I say, I was thinking to myself, what's his leg now but a cane? A whalebone cane. Yes, thinks I, it was only a playful cudgeling. In fact, only a whaleboning that he gave me, not a base kick. Besides, thinks I, look at it once. Why, the end of it, the foot part, what a small sort of end it is. Whereas, if a broad-footed farmer kicked me, there's a devilish broad insult. But this insult is whittled down to a point only. But now comes the greatest joke of the dream, Flask. While I was battering away at the pyramid, a sort of badger-haired old merman with a hump on his back takes me by the shoulders and slews me round. "What are you 'bout?" says he. "Slid, man, but I was frightened. Such a fizz." But somehow next moment I was over the fright. "What am I about?" says I at last. "And what business is that of yours, I should like to know, Mr. Humpback? Do you want a kick?" By the Lord, Flask, I had no sooner said that than he turned round his stern to me, bent over, and dragging up a lot of seaweed he had for a clout. What do you think I saw? Why, thunder alive, man, his stern was stuck full of marlin spikes, with the points out. Says I, on second thoughts, I guess I won't kick you, old fellow. "Wise Stubb," said he, "wise Stubb." And he kept muttering it all the time, a sort of eating his own gums like a chimney hag. Seeing he wasn't going to stop saying over his "wise Stubb, wise Stubb," I thought I might as well fall to kicking the pyramid again, but I'd only just lifted my foot for it when he roared out, "Stop that kicking!" "Halloa," says I, "what's the matter now, old fella?" "Look ye here," says he, "let's argue the insult. Captain Ahab kicked ye, didn't he?" "Yes, he did," says I. "Right here it was." "Very good," says he. "He used his ivory leg, didn't he?" "Yes, he did," says I. "Well then," says he, "wise Stubb, what have you to complain of? Didn't he kick with right good will? It wasn't a common pitch pine leg he kicked with, was it? No, you were kicked by a great man, and with a beautiful ivory leg, Stubb. It's an honor. I consider it an honor. Listen, wise Stubb. In old England the greatest lords think it great glory to be slapped by a queen, and made garter knights of, but be your boast, Stubb, that ye were kicked by old Ahab, and made a wise man of. Remember what I say, be kicked by him, account his kicks honors, and on no account kick back, for you can't help yourself, wise Stubb. Don't you see that pyramid?" With that, he all of a sudden seemed somehow in some queer fashion to swim off into the air. I snored, rolled over, and there I was in my hammock. Now what do you think of that dream, Flask? "I don't know. It seems a sort of foolish to me, though." Maybe, but it's made a wise man of me, Flask. Do ye see Ahab standing there, sideways looking over stern? Well, the best thing you can do, Flask, is to let that old man alone. Never speak quick to him, whatever he says. Halloa! What's that he shouts? Hark! Masthead there! Look sharp, all of ye! There are whales hereabouts. If ye see a white one, split your lungs for him." What do ye think of that now, Flask? Ain't there a small drop of something queer about that, eh? A white whale. Did ye mark that, man? Look ye, there's something special in the wind. Stand by for it, Flask. Ahab has that's bloody on his mind. But, Mum, he comes this way. Chapter 32. Cetology. Already we are boldly launched upon the deep, but soon we shall be lost in its unshored, harborless immensities. Ere that come to pass, ere the Pequod's weedy hull rolls side by side with the barnacled holes of the Leviathan, at the outset it is but well to attend to a matter almost indispensable to a thorough, appreciative understanding of the more special Leviathanic revelations and allusions of all sorts which are to follow. It is some systemized exhibition of the whale and his broad genera that I would now fain put before you. Yet it is no easy task. The classification of the constituents of a chaos nothing less is here essayed. Listen to what the best and latest authorities have laid down. No branch of zoology is so much involved as that which is entitled Cetology, says Captain Scoresby, A.D. 1820. It is not my intention, were it in my power, to enter into the inquiry as to the true method of dividing the cetacea into groups and families. Utter confusion exists among the historians of this animal. Sperm whale, says Surgeon Beale, A.D. 1839. Unfitness to pursue our research in the unfathomable waters, impenetrable veil covering our knowledge of the cetacea, a field strewn with thorns, all these incomplete indications but serve to torture us naturalists. Thus speak of the whale the great Cuvier and John Hunter and Lesson, those lights of zoology and anatomy. Nevertheless, though of real knowledge there be little, yet of books there are plenty, and so, in some small degree, with cetology or the science of whales. Many are the men, small and great, old and new, landsmen and seamen, who have, at large or in little, written of the whale. Run over a few: the authors of the Bible, Aristotle, Pliny, Aldrovandi, Sir Thomas Browne, Gesner, Ray, Linnaeus, Radulesius, Willoughby, Green, Artedi, Sebald, Brisson, Martin, Lessepetit, Bonneterre, Desmarest, Baron Cuvier, Frederick Cuvier, John Hunter, Owen, Scoresby, Beale, Bennett, J. Ross Brown, the author of Miriam Coffin, Olmsted, and the Reverend Henry T. Cheever. But to what ultimate generalizing purpose all these have written, the above-cited extracts will show. Of the names in the list of whale authors, only those following Owen ever saw living whales, and but one of them was a real professional harpooner and whaleman. I mean Captain Scoresby. On the separate subject of the Greenland or right whale, he is the best existing authority. But Scoresby knew nothing and says nothing of the great sperm whale, compared with which the Greenland whale is almost unworthy mentioning. And here be it said that the Greenland whale is an usurper upon the throne of the seas. He is not even by any means the largest of the whales, yet owing to the long priority of his claims and the profound ignorance which, till some 70 years back, invested the then fabulous or utterly unknown sperm whale, and which ignorance to this present day still reigns in all but some few scientific retreats and whale ports, this usurpation has been every way complete. Reference to nearly all of the Leviathanic allusions in the great poets of past days will satisfy you that the Greenland whale, without one rival, was to them the monarch of the seas. But the time has at last come for a new proclamation. This is Charing Cross. Hear ye, good people of all, the Greenland whale is deposed. The great sperm whale now reigneth. There are only two books in being which at all pretend to put the living sperm whale before you, and at the same time, in the remotest degree, succeed in the attempt. Those books are Beale's and Bennett's, both in their time surgeons to English South Sea whale ships, and both exact and reliable men. The original matter touching the sperm whale to be found in their volumes is necessarily small, but so far as it goes, it is of excellent quality, though mostly confined to scientific description. As yet, however, the sperm whale, scientific or poetic, lives not complete in any literature. Far above all other hunted whales, his is an unwritten life. Now, the various species of whales need some sort of popular comprehensive classification, if only an easy outline one for the present, hereafter to be filled in all its departments by subsequent laborers. As no better man advances to take this matter in hand, I, hereupon, offer my own poor endeavors. I promise nothing complete, because any human thing supposed to be complete must for that reason infallibly be faulty. I shall not pretend to a minute anatomical description of the various species, or, in this place at least, to much of any description. My object here is simply to project the draft of a systemization of cetology. I am the architect, not the builder. But it is a ponderous task. No ordinary letter sorter in the post office is equal to it. To grope down into the bottom of the sea after them, to have one's hands among the unspeakable foundations, ribs, and very pelvis of the world, this is a fearful thing. What am I that I should essay to hook the nose of this Leviathan? The awful tauntings in Job might well appall me. Will he, the Leviathan, make a covenant with thee? Behold, the hope of him is vain. But I have swam through libraries and sailed through oceans. I have had to do with whales with these visible hands. I am in earnest, and I will try. There are some preliminaries to settle. First, the uncertain, unsettled condition of the science of cetology is in the very vestibule attested by the fact that in some quarters it still remains a moot point whether a whale be a fish. In his System of Nature, AD 1766, Linnaeus declares, "I hereby separate the whales from the fish." But of my own knowledge, I know that down to the year 1850, sharks and shad, alewives and herring, against Linnaeus's express edict, were still found dividing the possession of the same seas with the Leviathan. The grounds upon which Linnaeus would fain have banished the whales from the waters, he states as follows: on account of their warm bilocular heart, their lungs, their movable eyelids, their hollow ears, penem intrantum feminam mammis lactantum, and finally, ex lege naturae jure meritoque. I submitted all this to my friends Simeon Macy and Charlie Coffin of Nantucket, both messmates of mine in a certain voyage, and they united in the opinion that the reasons set forth were altogether insufficient. Charlie profanely hinted that they were humbug. Be it known that, waiving all argument, I take the good old-fashioned ground that the whale is a fish and call upon Holy Jonah to back me. This fundamental thing settled, the next point is, in what internal respect does the whale differ from other fish? Above, Linnaeus has given you those items, but in brief they are these: lungs and warm blood, whereas all other fish are lungless and cold-blooded. Next, how shall we define the whale by his obvious externals, so as conspicuously to label him for all time to come? To be short, then, a whale is a spouting fish with a horizontal tail. There you have him. However contracted, that definition is the result of expanded meditation. A walrus spouts much like a whale, but the walrus is not a fish because he is amphibious. But the last term of the definition is still more cogent as coupled with the first. Almost anyone must have noticed that all fish familiar to landsmen have not a flat, but a vertical tail, or up and down tail. Whereas among spouting fish, the tail, though it may be similarly shaped, invariably assumes a horizontal position. By the above definition of what a whale is, I do by no means exclude from the Leviathanic Brotherhood any sea creature hitherto identified with the whale by the best informed Nantucketers. Nor, on the other hand, link with it any fish hitherto authoritatively regarded as alien. A footnote: I am aware that down to the present time, the fish styled lamantins and dugongs, pigfish and sowfish of the coffins of Nantucket, are included by many naturalists among the whales. But as these pigfish are a nosy, contemptible set, mostly lurking in the mouths of rivers and feeding on wet hay, and especially as they do not spout, I deny their credentials as whales, and have presented them with their passports to quit the kingdom of Cetology. Hence, all the smaller, spouting and horizontal tailed fish must be included in this ground plan of Cetology. Now then, come the grand divisions of the entire whale host. First, according to magnitude, I divide the whales into 3 primary books, subdivisible into chapters, and these shall comprehend them all, both small and large. 1. The folio whale. 2. The octavo whale. 3. The duodecimo whale. As the type of the folio 1 present the sperm whale, of the octavo, the grampus, of the duodecimo, the porpoise. Folios. Among these, I here include the following chapters: 1. The sperm whale. 2. The right whale. 3. Finback whale. 4. The humpbacked whale. 5. The razorback whale. 6. The sulfur bottom whale. Book 1. Folio. Chapter 1. Sperm whale. This whale, among the English of old vaguely known as the trumpa whale and the physeter whale and the anvil-headed whale, is the present cachalot of the French, and the potfish of the Germans, and the macrocephalus of the Longwords. He is, without doubt, the largest inhabitant of the globe, the most formidable of all whales to encounter, the most majestic in aspect, and lastly, by far the most valuable in commerce, he being the only creature from which that valuable substance, spermaceti, is obtained. all his peculiarities will, in many other places, be enlarged upon. It is chiefly with his name that I now have to do. Philologically considered, it is absurd. Some centuries ago, when the sperm whale was almost wholly unknown in his own proper individuality, and when his oil was only accidentally obtained from the stranded fish, in those days spermaceti, it would seem, was popularly supposed to be derived from a creature identical with the one then known to England as the Greenland or right whale. It was the idea also that the same spermaceti was that quickening humor of the Greenland whale with which the first syllable of the word literally expresses. In those times also spermaceti was exceedingly scarce, not being used for light but only as an ointment and medicament. It was only to be had from the druggist as you nowadays buy an ounce of rhubarb. When, as I opine, in the course of time, the true nature of spermaceti became known, its original name was still retained by the dealers, no doubt to enhance its value by a notion so strangely significant of its scarcity. And so the appellation must at last have come to be bestowed upon the whale from which this spermaceti was really derived. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 2, Right Whale. In one respect, this is the most venerable of the leviathans, being the one first regularly hunted by man. It yields the article commonly known as whalebone or baleen, and the oil specially known as whale oil, an inferior article in commerce. Among the fishermen, he is indiscriminately designated by all the following titles: the whale, the Greenland whale, the black whale, the great whale, the true whale, the right whale. There's a deal of obscurity concerning the identity of the species, thus multitudinously baptized. What, then, is the whale which I include in the second species of my folios? It is the great mysticetus of the English naturalists, the Greenland whale of the English whalemen, the baleen ordinaire of the French whalemen, the Gronland's walfisk of the Swedes. It is the whale which, for more than 2 centuries past, has been hunted by the Dutch and English in the Arctic seas. It is the whale which the American fishermen have long pursued in the Indian Ocean, on the Brazil banks, on the Norwest coast, and various other parts of the world, designated by them right whale cruising grounds. Some pretend to see a difference between the Greenland whale of the English and the right whale of the Americans, but they precisely agree in all their grand features. Nor has there yet been presented a single determinate fact upon which to ground a radical distinction. It is by endless subdivisions based upon the most inconclusive differences that some departments of natural history become so repellingly intricate. The right whale will be elsewhere treated of at some length, with reference to elucidating the sperm whale. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 3, Finback. Under this head, I reckon a monster which, by the various names of finback, tallspout, and long john, has been seen in almost every sea, and is commonly the whale whose distant jet is so often described by passengers crossing the Atlantic in the New York packet tracks. In the length he attains, and his baleen, the finback resembles the right whale, but is of a less portly girth and a lighter color, something approaching to olive. His great lips present a cable-like aspect, formed by the intertwisting, slanting folds of large wrinkles. His grand distinguishing feature, the fin, from which he derives his name, is often a conspicuous object. This fin is some 3 or 4 feet long, growing vertically from the hinder part of the back, of an angular shape and with a very sharp pointed end. Even if not the slightest other part of the creature be visible, this isolated fin will at times be seen plainly projecting from the surface. When the sea is moderately calm and slightly marked with spherical ripples, and this gnomon-like fin stands up and casts shadows upon the wrinkled surface, it may well be supposed that the watery circle surrounding it somewhat resembles a dial, with its style and wavy hour lines graved onto it. On that Ahaz dial, the shadow often goes back. The finback is not gregarious. He seems a whale-hater, as some men are man-haters. Very shy, always going solitary, unexpectedly rising to the surface in the remotest and most sullen waters. His straight and single lofty jet rising like a tall misanthropic spear upon a barren plain, gifted with such wondrous power and velocity in swimming as to defy all present pursuit from man, this Leviathan seems the banished and unconquerable Cain of his race, bearing for his mark that style upon his back. From having the baleen in his mouth, the finback is sometimes included in the right whale among a theoretic species denominated whalebone whales, that is, whales with baleen. Of these so-called whalebone whales, there would seem to be several varieties, most of which, however, are little known. Broad-nosed whales and beaked whales, pike-headed whales, bunched whales, underjawed whales, and rostrated whales are the fishermen's names for a few sorts. In connection with this appellative of whalebone whales, it is of great importance to mention that however such a nomenclature may be convenient in facilitating allusions to some kind of whales, yet it is in vain to attempt a clear classification of the leviathan founded upon either his baleen, or hump, or fin, or teeth. Notwithstanding that those marked parts or features very obviously seem better adapted to afford the basis for a regular system of cetology than any other detached bodily distinctions which the whale and his kinds presents. How then? The baleen, hump, backfin, and teeth. These are things whose peculiarities are indiscriminately dispersed among all sorts of whales without any regard to what may be the nature of their structure in other and more essential particulars. Thus, the sperm whale and the humpbacked whale each has a hump, but there the similitude ends. Then, the same humpback whale and the Greenland whale, each of these has baleen, but there again the similitude ceases. And it is just the same with the other parts above mentioned. In various sorts of whales, they form such irregular combinations, or in the case of any one of them detached, such an irregular isolation as utterly to defy all general methodization formed upon such a basis. On this rock, every one of the whale naturalists has split. But it may possibly be conceived that, in the internal parts of the whale, in his anatomy, there at least we shall be able to hit the right classification. Nay, what thing, for example, is there in the Greenland whale's anatomy more striking than his baleen? And yet we have seen by his baleen that it is impossible correctly to classify the Greenland whale. And if you descend into the bowels of the various leviathans, why, there you will not find distinctions a 50th part as available to the systematizer as those external ones already enumerated. What then remains? Nothing but to take hold of the whales bodily in their entire liberal volume and boldly sort them that way. And this is the bibliographical system here adopted, and it is the only one that can possibly succeed, for it alone is practicable. To proceed. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 4, Humpback. This whale is often seen on the northern American coast. He has been frequently captured there and towed into harbor. He has a great pack on him like a peddler, or you might call him the elephant and castle whale. At any rate, the popular name for him does not sufficiently distinguish him, since the sperm whale also has a hump, though a smaller one. His oil is not very valuable. He has baleen. He is the most gamesome and light-hearted of all the whales, making more gay foam and whitewater generally than any other of them. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 5, Razorback. Of this whale little is known but his name. I have seen him at a distance off Cape Horn. Of a retiring nature, he eludes both hunters and philosophers. Though no coward, he has never yet shown any part of him but his back, which rises in a long, sharp ridge. Let him go. I know little more of him, nor does anybody else. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 6, Sulphur Bottom. Another retiring gentleman with a brimstone belly, doubtless got by scraping along the Tartarian tiles in some of his profounder divings. He is seldom seen. At least, I have never seen him, except in the remoter southern seas, and then always at too great a distance to study his countenance. He is never chased. He would run away with rope walks of line. Prodigies are told of him. Adieu, Sulphur Bottom. I can say nothing more that is true of ye, nor can the oldest Nantucketer. Thus ends Book 1, Folio, and now begins Book 2, Octavo. Octavos. Footnote. Why this book of whales is not denominated the Quarto is very plain, because while the whales of this order, though smaller than those of the former order, nevertheless retain a proportionate likeness to them in figure, yet the bookbinder's Quarto, volume in its diminished form, does not preserve the shape of the folio volume, but the octavo does. Octavos. These embrace the whales of the middling magnitude, among which at present may be numbered 1. The grampus, 2. The blackfish, 3. The narwhal, 4. The killer, 5. The thrasher. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 1, Grampus. Though this fish, whose loud sonorous breathing, or rather blowing, has furnished a proverb to landsmen, it is so well known a denizen of the deep, yet is he not popularly classed among whales. Possessing all the grand distinctive features of the Leviathan, most naturalists have recognized him for one. He is of moderate octavo size, varying from 15 to 25 feet in length, and of corresponding dimensions round the waist. He swims in herds. He is never regularly hunted, though his oil is considerable in quantity, and pretty good for light. By some fishermen, his approach is regarded as premonitory of the advance of the great sperm whale. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 2, Blackfish. I give the popular fishermen's names for all these fish, for generally they are the best. When any name happens to be vague or inexpressive, I shall say so and suggest another. I do so now. Touching the blackfish, so called because blackness is the rule among almost all whales. So call him the hyena whale, if you please. His veracity is well known, and from the circumstance that the inner angles of his lips are curved upwards, he carries an everlasting Mephistophelian grin on his face. This whale averages some 16 or 18 feet in length. He is found in almost all latitudes. He has a peculiar way of showing his dorsal hooked fin in swimming, which looks something like a Roman nose. When not more profitably employed, the sperm whale hunters sometimes capture the hyena whale to keep up the supply of cheap oil for domestic employment, as some frugal housekeepers, in the absence of company and quite alone by themselves, burn unsavory tallow instead of odorous wax. Though their blubber is very thin, some of these whales will yield you upwards of 30 gallons of oil. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 3, Narwhal, that is, nostril whale. Another instance of a curiously named whale, so named, I suppose, for his peculiar horn being originally mistaken for a peaked nose. The creature is some 16 feet in length, while its horn averages 5 feet, though some exceed 10 and even attain to 15 feet. Strictly speaking, this horn is but a lengthened tusk, growing out from the jaw in a line a little depressed from the horizontal. But it is only found on the sinister side, which has an ill effect, giving its owner something analogous to the aspect of a clumsy left-handed man. What precise purpose this ivory horn or lance answers, it would be hard to say. It does not seem to be used like the blade of the swordfish and billfish, though some sailors tell me that the narwhal employs it for a rake in turning over the bottom of the sea for food. Charlie Coffin said it was used for an ice piercer, for the narwhal, rising to the surface of the polar sea and finding it sheeted with ice, thrusts his horn up and so breaks through. But you cannot prove either of these surmises to be correct. My own opinion is that, however this one-sided horn may really be used by the narwhal, however that may be, it would certainly be very convenient to him for a folder in reading pamphlets. The narwhal I have heard called the tusked whale, the horned whale, and the unicorn whale. He is certainly a curious example of the unicornism to be found in almost every kingdom of animated nature. From certain cloistered old authors, I have gathered that this same sea unicorn's horn was in ancient days regarded as the great antidote against poison, and as such, preparations of it brought immense prices. It was also distilled to a volatile salts for fainting ladies, the same way that the horns of the male deer are manufactured into hartshorn. Originally, it was in itself accounted an object of great curiosity. Black letter tells me that Sir Martin Frobisher, on his return from that voyage, when Queen Bess did gallantly wave her jeweled hand to him from a window of a Greenwich palace as his bold ship sailed down the Thames, "When Sir Martin returned from that voyage," saith Black Letter, "on bended knees he presented to her highness a prodigious long horn of the narwhal, which for a long period after hung in the castle at Windsor." An Irish author avers that the Earl of Leicester, on bended knees, did likewise present to her highness another horn, pertaining to a land beast of the unicorn nature. The narwhal has a very picturesque, leopard-like look, being of a milk-white ground color dotted with round and oblong spots of black. His oil is very superior, clear, and fine, but there is little of it, and he is seldom hunted. He is mostly found in the circumpolar seas. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 4, Killer. Of this whale, little is precisely known to the Nantucketer, and nothing at all to the professed naturalist. From what I have seen of him at a distance, I should say that he was about the bigness of a grampus. He is very savage, a sort of Fiji fish. He sometimes takes the great folio whales by the lip and hangs there like a leech till the mighty brute is worried to death. The killer is never hunted. I never heard what sort of oil he has. Exception might be taken to the name bestowed upon this whale on the ground of its indistinctness, for we are all killers, on land and sea, Bonapartes and sharks included. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 5, Thrasher. This gentleman is famous for his tail, which he uses for a ferule in thrashing his foes. He mounts the folio whale's back, and as he swims, he works his passage by flogging him, as some schoolmasters get along in the world by similar process. Still less is known of the thrasher than of the killer. Both are outlaws, even in the lawless seas. Thus ends Book 2, Octavo, and begins Book 3, Duodecimo. Duodecimos. These include the smaller whales. 1. The Huzzah porpoise. 2. The Algerine porpoise. 3. The mealy-mouth porpoise. To those who have not chanced specially to study the subject, it may seem strange that fishes not commonly exceeding 4 or 5 feet should be marshaled among whales, a word which, in the popular sense, always conveys an idea of hugeness. But the creatures set down above as duodecimos are infallibly whales by the terms of my definition of what a whale is, i.e., a spouting fish with a horizontal tail. Book 3, Duodecimo, Chapter 1, Huzzah porpoise. This is the common porpoise found almost all over the globe. The name is of my own bestowal, for there are more than one sort of porpoises, and something must be done to distinguish them. I call him thus because he always swims in hilarious shoals, which upon the broad sea keep tossing themselves to heaven like caps in a 4th of July crowd. Their appearance is generally hailed with delight by the mariner. Full of fine spirits, they invariably come from the breezy billows to windward. They are the lads that always live before the wind. They are accounted a lucky omen. If you yourself can withstand 3 cheers at beholding these vivacious fish, then heaven help ye. The spirit of godly gamesomeness is not in ye. A well-fed plump Huzzah porpoise will yield you 1 good gallon of good oil, but the fine and delicate fluid extracted from his jaws is exceedingly valuable. It is in request among jewelers and watchmakers. Sailors put it on their hones. Porpoise meat is good eating, you know. It may never have occurred to you that a porpoise spouts. Indeed, his spout is so small that it is not very readily discernible. But the next time you have a chance, watch him, and you will then see the great sperm whale himself in miniature. Book 3, Duodecimo, Chapter 2, Algerine porpoise. A pirate. Very savage. He is only found, I think, in the Pacific. He is somewhat larger than the Huzzah porpoise, but of much the same general make. Provoke him, and he will buckle to a shark. I have lowered for him many times, but never yet saw him captured. Book 3, Duodecimo, Chapter 3, Mealy-mouth porpoise. The largest kind of porpoise, and only found in the Pacific, so far it is known. The only English name by which he has hitherto been designated is that of the fishers, right whale porpoise, from the circumstance that he is chiefly found in the vicinity of that folio. In shape, he differs in some degree from the Huzzah porpoise, being of a less rotund and jolly girth. Indeed, he is of a quite neat and gentlemanlike figure. He has no fins on his back, most other porpoises have, and he has a lovely tail and sentimental Indian eyes of a hazel hue, but his mealy mouth spoils all. Through his entire back, down to his side fins, is of a deep, sable, yet a boundary line, distinct as the mark in a ship's hull, called the bright waist. That line streaks him from stem to stern with 2 separate colors, black above and white below. The white comprises part of his head and the whole of his mouth, which makes him look as if he had just escaped from a felonious visit to a meal bag. A most mean and mealy aspect. His oil is much like that of the common porpoise. Beyond the Duodecimo, the system does not proceed, inasmuch as the porpoise is the smallest of the whales. Above, you have all the leviathans of note. But there are a rabble of uncertain, fugitive, half-fabulous whales, which, as an American whaleman, I know by reputation, but not personally. I shall enumerate them by their forecastle appellations, for possibly such a list may be valuable to future investigators who may complete what I have here but begun. If any of the following whales shall hereafter be caught and marked, then he can readily be incorporated into this system according to his folio, octavo, or duodecimo magnitude. The bottlenose whale, the junk whale, the puddinghead whale, the cape whale, the leading whale, the cannon whale, the scrag whale, the coppered whale, the elephant whale, the iceberg whale, the cog whale, the blue whale, etc. From Icelandic, Dutch, and Old English authorities, there might be quoted other lists of uncertain whales, blessed with all manner of uncouth names, but I omit them as altogether obsolete, and can hardly help suspecting them for mere sounds, full of leviathanism, but signifying nothing. Finally, it was stated at the outset that this system would not be here and at once perfected. You cannot but plainly see that I have kept my word, but I now leave my cetological system standing thus unfinished, even as the great cathedral of Cologne was left, with the crane still standing upon the top of the uncompleted tower. For small erections may be finished by their first architects, grand ones, true ones, ever leave the copestone to posterity. God keep me from ever completing anything. This whole book is but a draft, nay, but the draft of a draft. Oh, time, strength, cash, and patience. Thanks for joining me this week. It was good to get through a full hour, and it feels fitting to end with Cetology, which is, I believe, the second longest of all the chapters in the book. So, there we are. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you next week.